What is going on, everyone? It's your guy, Cole Jackson, back here on Road Graders and a very special Friday live stream edition. We are going to be going through your questions. You guys asked them. I'm joined by Spencer Schultz at Ravens for Dummies over on Twitter. We're going to be answering all your questions, setting up the Ravens and Bengals on Sunday. Spenny, my guy, how's it going?
Going well. It's an interesting matchup. Football is back, so we're fired up. Love it. Week 2 feels like a real. We're in the season now. The week 1, everybody's excited. It's new, but we just had like a real Thursday night game. The first one, Chiefs Lions, that doesn't count. It's like the inaugural game. Right. Now we had a real Thursday night game to get us going last night with the Eagles and the Vikings.
And it started as a slop fest that turned into an offensive shit show, which is exactly what you expect on Thursday night football. So it did feel like we're finally here, whereas everyone's excited for the first Thursday nighter. It almost feels like a playoff game with your anticipation, but we are back. And so folks in the that are joining us, if you guys want to drop questions, I have a bunch that I pulled from Twitter. We're just going to kind of run through over the next 35 minutes. So feel free to hop in, ask what you want to ask. I'll start by just acknowledging that Spencer and I are very aware that it looks like we're about to sell you either sell you a car or sell you life insurance with the thumbnail. I will fix that next time we do this. But let's start with the first question. And this one wasn't asked, but I do want to ask Spencer because it was all over Twitter this morning. Is football cyclical?
No, it is not. Every year is a new year. The past will reign forever. Deep balls galore, 50 points a game, 20 touchdowns. Football is not cyclical.
For those wondering, there's this goes back to 2019 with the Ravens being an outlier offense for running the ball, but a lot of us that kind of been around the game for a long time have talked about how cyclical the game is. And yes, it's all pass happy now and defenses will adjust and then you'll be able to need to run the ball. And that was the whole Greg Roman's the zag to the zig. And anyway, just there's data points out there, which I was laughing at this morning because it's like, oh, football is cyclical and teams are going to run the ball. It's like, yeah, you need to be able to do everything well to be a good football team. That's how you play matchups. That's how you win. But let's get into the questions. I was just had to start with this. So this one's just one for you, Spenny. So one of our followers is a friend visiting Baltimore. Any underrated gems to visit that most tourists would miss?
Underrated gems. Chaps Pit Beef, I think, is one that goes under the radar. Get you some Baltimore pit beef. It is.
Where did you get me polluted?
Admiral's Where did Cup. I get you polluted?
Admiral's Cup.
Oh yeah, Admiral's Cup.
I don't know Cup, but I had a good time.
I would say really, if you go to Fells Point, it's like a touch touristy. Cole, you were there. It's not like some touristy area necessarily. The inner harbor where like the aquarium is and that whole deal is like tourists walking around. It's a really like the worst area of Baltimore in terms of, I would say, like wasted potential. So I would say go check out Chaps Pit Beef. It's a little outside the city, but it's a diners, drive-ins, and dives, Guy Fieri specialty. So everybody talks crab cakes and seafood and stuff like that, but Pit Beef is Baltimore's very own. It is Baltimore barbecue, and Chaps is unbelievably good. So go check that out. It's a little out of the way, but I'd say that's a hidden gem. And then just go hang out in Fells Point, find a bar that looks fun. There's the most bars in a square mile in the United States are located in Fells Point. So tons and tons and tons of bars, restaurants, and stuff right in Fells Point, right on the water.
And that's where I stayed. I stayed right on Fleet Street, right between, it was like the border of Fells Point and Little Italy. It was I think a 6-block walk to Broadway. And then Broadway's just packed with bars. There's something to do. So if you're into the night scene, that's definitely the spot to go. Let's keep moving here. And I think this is going to be the key question when we're looking at Ravens Bengals, when we're considering the injuries on the offensive line. This is and it's coming from our boy ZJ. It's one of the key questions. So how can the Ravens successfully run against Reeder and Hill, Hendrickson and Hubbard, and that linebacker group? So focusing on the run, I've been saying, I just put it in my article that came out this morning that kind of previewed the trenches. I think the best thing that the Ravens can do, and I don't think fans necessarily want to hear this after everyone went goo for the pass game. But I think the best thing they can do with the offensive line in the state it is in terms of backfilling with 2 injuries to 2 key players is establish the run early and be able to use play action off of that. And some of the great things that we saw in the second half, I think a lot of it was coming off play action and creating easy reads. What do you think about that, Spenny?
Yeah, definitely. I would say when I look at this Bengals defense, that's the strength, really, right? DJ Reader, Hendrickson, and I would throw those linebackers in there. But I would say the group I want to attack is their safeties. I want to attack Dax Hill. I want to attack Nick Scott. It's tough. My first answer was going to be run to the perimeter, but then I was like, who are the corners? Cam Taylor-Britt, crazy physical physical corner. Chidobe Awuzie is no slouch in that department either. So I would say really maybe going a little YY, trying to attack that C gap, D gap a little bit more so. Get them working a little laterally, and then need backs that are just going to really cut downhill. It's tough, man. DJ Reader will move A gap, one tech, 0 tech all the way. He'll get out to the C gap, D gap. He'll run. He'll make a mess there. So really tough. If you watch that Browns game, hey, they had Wyatt Teller, who I thought had an awesome performance in that game, but still Nick Chubb, who is, for my money, the best runner in football. Like, he had to make do a few times in that game. Had to really make some smart decisions, smart cuts, and they didn't. I don't want to say they bottled him up, but they kept it a back and forth battle, I'll say. So it's tough, but got to get to those safeties. I would say getting a little creative. We saw that fun crunch concept, stuff like that, but that's not stuff that you're going to see called more than a couple of times. Defenses aren't going to think about it. It's going to be zone. It's going to be power. So I would say, hey, you see if you can work them laterally and just hurt them with those cutback lanes. But man, they're a stout group. They're a great run defense, and I don't think they will run successfully. I don't think they'll have a high success rate or things like that. Really, no matter what they do.
Yeah, what was interesting was the Browns, I think, finished with 206 yards, and so everybody was talking. At least I got a couple of replies to some of my breakdown videos being like, oh, well, the Browns just ran all over them. I mean, they kind of did, but a lot of it was big chunks, and I looked at the running lanes, the PFF charts. 123 of the 206 yards came outside of the offensive tackle. So that just shows where they attacked. It was all working their outside zone or Deshaun Watson on scrambles or, zone read, that sort of thing. So running up
Watson probably had 50 some yards scrambling.
Yeah. So I think a lot of that was, context. You needed just where it's not so much the total yards, it's where they run it. And so that's something where, the Ravens have been trying to get something going with outside zone for a couple of years now, and they still haven't been able to. I don't know if that's going to come in this game, but I do think that's the best thing that they could do early and unlock kind of the boot action game out of that. So moving on to the next one, kind of flipping to the other side of the ball in the trenches. Would love to hear your perspective on the Bengals tackles. What's going on with Zeus? Is Jonas still struggling? I'll kind of start on this one. I only watched the first half. I didn't get through the full game, just kind of studying their offensive line this week from the Browns game. I thought Brown Jr. and this is the context of this is Orlando Brown Jr. every single year he was in Baltimore had a bad September and then turned it around later in the season and ended up playing really well. That's even like the 2019 year. It was long rumored that he was coming into camp out of shape, and I think it took him a while to get into shape. That didn't look any different to me this year. He looks like he's plodding a little bit. So that's an area where I think, the David Ojabo or Odafe Owe, that type of explosive speed could be a really interesting matchup. As for Jonah Williams, he's just not that good. Like, that's just kind of the reality. He's just kind of an average NFL offensive tackle in pass protection. And I personally think he's going to really struggle with Clowney and his ability to convert speed to power and hit his what I think Clowney did the best of in week 1 was just his bull rush and moving guys back into the quarterback's lap. What do you think of that, Spen?
I love that last bit there. Jonah Williams, you nailed it. He'll win some, he'll lose some. His anchor's not something that he's super confident in. Kind of has to mix up his sets a little bit so that you can't get into him. But like you said, Clowney, that's what Jadeveon Clowney is. He is an explosive disruptor and want to make guys move off their spot. With that, Burrow didn't look super comfortable moving around, especially in the rain. So if you can get Burrow to start moving off his spot, especially if Mike McDonald's able to do what he did last year and mix up coverage a little bit, get Burrow to go to his second, third read, end move, you're going to have a good day defensively.
I thought what I said and I'm kind of curious of your thought on this. So, I mean, we saw a lot of really fun simulated pressure setups in week 1, and that's not abnormal. We saw it under Wink. Mike McDonald came in with a little similar flavor. One of my favorites was they set up with a 6-man line. They had Owe and Queen on the right side, 4 guys on the left side. They blitzed. They only rushed the left side. They dropped the 2 on the right side. So it created a 4v3 on the left side and 2 guys on the right side blocking nobody. It was one of Clowney's, I think it was one of his QB hits. So that's kind of what I want to see out of them in terms of sending numbers. I just find Burrow's a lot like Mahomes, where he just picks apart your blitz. Is that kind of what you've seen from Burrow, especially against us?
It's an interesting way that McDonald attacks Burrow when he wants to blitz or sim pressure. It'll be a little bit of a staggered 2-level rush with those linebackers if they are going to actually blitz. And everything is designed to funnel to the middle of the field. Like, they want to force Burrow to throw hot where there are more bodies. They don't want him to get hots that are able to be a quick valve towards the sideline or down the sideline. So it's really trying to funnel everything there. And again, disguising coverage makes him unsure. Is there a robber coming down? Is there someone, is there a rat in the hole? So I love what McDonald has done. And again, what Burrow said this week in his media availability was that every time we played them, we saw new things we hadn't seen before. And I don't know, it's like Santa Claus's bag with Mike McDonald. It just keeps going and going and going. There'll be another look. There'll be another pressure. And that is what Mike McDonald is known for throughout the NFL, throughout college football. I think he's growing into a really big name guy. He's not a flashy. If you're talking ESPN, NFL Network, they're not having segments on Mike McDonald. Oh my God, get this guy a coaching job. It's kind of it's Dave Aranda to me, very much so. It's a similar system and a similar kind of guy that's just even keel, quiet, doesn't get a ton of love, but coaches love him. They think he's a genius. He's really well respected. Everybody wants to watch his clinics and stuff, specifically on those pressure fronts. So how deep does good old Chris Kringle McDonald's bag go?
Do you think we lose him eventually? Do you think he's going to garner that?
I think he's the next Ravens head coach.
Interesting. I love it. Okay. I like that. Let's maybe dig into that later. Is that a retirement then? Or is that?
I don't know, man. Johnny's old, but he's young. It's tough.
No, for sure. It feels like he's old, but I feel like he's got to be like, what, 52? Like, that's not that old.
His dad coached until he was, God knows, I don't know. I think into his late 70s or early 80s. Obviously, Jim is still alive and kicking up there in Michigan. Well, I guess he's kind of seated and kicking right now while he's suspended. But the Harbaughs are a football family from birth to death. So who knows, man? Who knows?
Love it. Okay, so this is a good one. Because I thought there was that graphic that was going around about first reads, and I kind of had to chuckle about it because Zay was that astronomical first read. I mean, he caught 6 screens. Like, when you're always going to be the first read if you're the screen guy. So I think it was just a little slightly misleading, just given the context of the targets he got. But moving into this, like, do you think the Ravens went to Zay so much on the bubble screens to basically put it on film so teams overextend, which will open it up for Bateman and Odell? What do you kind of think about that?
I'm sure there are things that they do want to build off of in terms of motion and in terms of eye candy. But to me, it just felt like that was their game plan, was we're going to get this kid the ball to go win this game. And it was going to get the ball out of Lamar's hands. It was going to give the offensive line some help. And it ended up being, I mean, one of them, I think the sexiest one that he had was on 3rd and long, and he goes and makes like 2-3 guys miss, breaks tackle, rumbles, I think on 3rd and 10 for, 16, 18 yards, something like that.
Yeah.
So That was because the Texans were showing cover 0. So that was their answer to cover 0, for instance. So I don't know that they were setting anything up with that specifically yet, but I know that they will build off of it. They will, what is the word? I can't think of the right word. I'll think of it later. They build off of it throughout as the season goes, and we'll create more from it. But I don't know if they were doing that specifically yet.
Did you feel that the game plan in terms of the play calling from the offense, did you feel that that was slightly more vanilla than you would have expected, or was that just the game plan and it is what it is?
That is the aspect that I think was a little more hidden. And I think that the Ravens in this Texans matchup, I called it the 4th preseason game. I think that they were really not trying to show much. They kind of just sat and waited for the Texans to implode, but the Texans didn't. CJ Stroud didn't force the ball into dangerous situations. Defensively, there wasn't some big blown coverage at any point. To me, it looked like the Texans are a well-disciplined team that wanted to keep the rookie quarterback feeling okay, feeling all right, not go into Baltimore against this madman defensive coordinator that is rushing 13 different guys throughout the game and have CJ Stroud lose his confidence. So I think D'Amico Ryans did a great job in that game, and I think the Texans will be a tough out for a lot of teams this season.
They kind of remind me, maybe not last year, but the year before, the Lions when Dan Campbell took over. They're not, and D'Amico is kind of that players coach type guy. Like you could just tell players love to play for him.
Both of them were longtime NFL veterans.
Exactly. And so I'm really interested to see how they play. Their defense it's fun. Like that's a fun defense with some fun
Stingley,
guys.
Will Anderson, John Grenard on the other side is probably one of the most under-heralded
Jerry
players.
Hughes, the seasoned vet that made some plays. Like they got some dudes out there. Plus, Denzel Perryman played.
Yeah, well. that's what I was right about to say. Perryman's been a thorn in the Ravens' side for years. On the Raiders, he made plays on Monday night in the season opener a couple years ago. Chargers back in the day. So Denzel Perryman can ball a little bit.
And I think their offense really showed what you were speaking to in terms of McDonald's strategy. I didn't look at the pass chart, but if I do, it's guaranteed it's all short, intermediate, over the middle of the field. It felt like everything they caught was a crossing route, and it was kind of Woods and Nico catching them over the middle and trying to turn it upfield for Yak. So kind of speaks to what we're going to probably see. I'm expecting the defensive strategy this week to be a little bit of the bend, don't break. Just keep the ball in front of you, try and settle for field goals, that sort of thing. But that's kind of been how they've played them. So moving on to the next one, probably one of the more, we'll start with Ricard. So this is coming from Skeptic Goat. So everyone knows our guy Skep over on Twitter. How does Ricard feel he fits in this offense? So let's just talk about Ricard a little bit, because I think a lot of folks didn't think he'd make the team, which I thought was crazy. He doesn't fit into this more spread out offense. My take has always been there's no offense in the history of football that's not going to find a way to use a 305-pound battering ram. There's always going to be a way to use someone like that to your advantage. What do you kind of think about Ricard's fit, how he played on Sunday, how he factored into the second half?
He's Nick Boyle. I mean, that's what he is at this point. He's a big tight end that can block his tail off and will dig guys out, seal stuff up, and open up lanes. So we saw on that super fun crunch run, him just drop to his knees and extend through and shoot his hips and textbook form on a defensive lineman to make sure that he was going to sacrifice his body so that lineman couldn't get through. And the Ravens offensive line, as they transition into being a more spread offense, now especially that you're going to have no Stanley, no Linderbaum, if you're going to go run 5- and 6-man protection from spread looks, it's going to put a lot of stress on the Ravens offensive line as opposed to what we're used to seeing. That I think is going to be an adjustment, and the lack of continuity is not going to help. But maybe having some of the depth guys get a little bit of continuity today so that they can build on that if needed later in the season will be a hidden benefit. But Ricard is going to end up getting attached there as that 6th offense. That's what they called him in the offseason, 6 offensive linemen. They were having him do guard stuff. He said he gained a bunch of weight, and they're using him as an offensive lineman in theory this year.
Completely agree. And what about Malik Harrison and the fit? Because I didn't look at his snap count, but he seemed to play a lot.
He's kind of that Sam that 4-3 kind of Sam guy that we're used to from 15 years ago that's going to walk down to the line of scrimmage. I think that he's always had really strong block deconstruction. He is incredibly violent and physical at the point of attack. He is a tough guy to move out off a spot when he engages, and that's how they're using him. We talk about Pat Ricard being a battering ram. Malik Harrison is going to set a hard edge, a firm edge. He's not at this point. I was really, really high on him coming out.
I remember.
He hasn't really shown what I thought he was capable of maybe in space. We've seen a little bit of coverage ability. We've seen him closing some windows up the seams and stuff a little bit, but more so he's just being used as a backside, a lot of time backside, weak side, edge setting, crashing, outside linebacker, and that's a role. I think he's a role player. And
that's what I was going to say. He's found a fit in this defense, and I think that's a huge credit to him, including playing, special teams role. So I know that's not – folks don't really want to hear that, but, I mean, there's a lot of credit that goes into that, and it's really helping us get through the Tyus Bowser or lack of Tyus Bowser situation, especially with – a guy like Ojabo, I thought Ojabo played pretty well against the run. He was surprisingly more physical than I was expecting, and
he just didn't. He wasn't waiting around. He was always finishing the play, finishing to the ball. There wasn't like a looking around moment. It was like, all right, keep going, going, pressing and pressing and pressing. Harrison ended up playing 8 snaps against the run and 6 in coverage with 1 as a pass.
It's not that much. Wow.
15 snaps out of 77 defensive plays.
That's shocking. Wow. Okay. So yeah, I should have.
A lot of it, I think, was early in the game, so it stands out. And then as you're kind of getting into the weeds of tape, you might not realize.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, moving on here. Just going off of week 1, who would you target as a potential trade deadline addition? I know you and I have talked about this 100 times, especially at the end of the offseason where you could be looking at. It's early. I mean, it's tough to say because now, I mean, maybe you're thinking a guard or a tackle or someone that could kind of come in and help out the O-line. It's early. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up free agency for 2024 here. So you usually assume it's going to be someone that's a rental. Daniil Hunter is a target there. I would say maybe a Marcus Davenport, let's look at the cornerbacks here. Man, maybe Kenny Moore on the Colts, maybe I don't know, Steven Nelson later in the year, something like that. So tough now. We'll see. It depends on who really craps out over the next couple of weeks here. Maybe somebody on the Cardinals, something like that, Marco Wilson. But Gotta kind of wait and see who's not in contention once we get into mid-October or so, and would be looking to move on from some guys and where the Ravens could use some help.
Agreed. And this is a good one. Actually, I'm going to start. I have a question before this. Who outperformed in week 1 on the Ravens, either side of the ball, both sides of the ball, whatever you want to do? Who exceeded your expectations the most?
I don't know. It's a tough one. I know who didn't. Like, I know guys that didn't. I'm trying to think of somebody. I guess Odafe Owe. I'll probably say Odafe Owe.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, he
way better. Firing. Like, so much better.
He looked like he looked in the beginning of his rookie year.
Yeah. He looks like the game slowed down a little bit for him. I don't know. It's hard. Like, there's a couple of those play action reads where I felt he worked up the field after making the read a hell of a lot quicker than he did last year, which I know isn't like anything significant, but when you kind of see little glimpses of that, it's like, okay. And he spent most of his time going against Laramie Tunsil, who's third, fourth best left tackle in the game.
Top five left tackle.
Yeah, top 5, 100%. So one guy that I thought, I wouldn't say they were the breakout star, but one guy that I did think played better than I was expecting was just Rashad Bateman. Didn't play a lot, but a guy that I thought he looked very clean, very physical. There was you highlighted that one play to me that he turned up field and went head first right into the defender. Like it looked like, again, like he looked confident or comfortable is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, he was pushing off that foot confidently on the Zay Flowers little whip route. Bateman had a shifty, I guess, skinny post, on that, where he looked exactly like he looked when he was healthier. I would say probably as a rookie towards the end of that year when he started to really lose some guys in coverage. So I think he ended up taking about a 50-50 share inside outside. I think he's probably going to be the primary H or whatever you want to call him as a slot. And that's what he did in Minnesota. I think in his final season, he ended up working in the slot. So he's the bigger-ish guy. He's the taller guy that can work the middle of the field a little bit more. So I'm curious to see what happens with Odell and him later in the year, if they start to make that a little more variable, a little more interchangeable. But Odell looks like, the backside guy in 3x1 every single time right now. So that's what Bateman was last year. He was the X. He was the split end. He was the backside guy. And didn't see much of that. So curious how he ends up playing this year. But like you said, love to see him. Guy who said that when he was a rookie, he said a reporter asked him, is the game faster at the NFL level? He said, no, it's stronger. Like, I'm getting yanked down by linebackers with one hand. That's never happened to me before. So it was good to see him play through his pads a little bit, play behind his pads, and go attack those two defenders in space on one of his receptions, like you mentioned. I think it was like a 2nd and 17, and he got like 9 yards back, something like that, 3 of which maybe after contact.
Yeah, I agree. And just, again, I think it really came down for me just confidence. Like, it just looked like he was just out playing again. Which isn't necessarily a comment about him. It's just more a comment about what happens when you're coming off an injury. And you've kind of seen it in the past with other guys where they kind of struggle to get back into that confidence spot. So moving on, this question just kind of came in. I know wide back season's kind of a joke, but, I'm kind of curious what you thought about Duvernay, Aguilar. Do we see them getting worked in at any time? Like, it's hard to kind of envision them playing meaningful roles when they're healthy.
I think Aguilar played a good bit.
He played about the same as Bateman, so it's essentially. I guess
a lot of it was in the run game. I think it's kind of that's an early indicator. Let's see. Bateman had 25 snaps, 5 of them were in the run game, and where's Aguilar? Aguilar had 24, and 15 of them were in the run game. So Aguilar was only on the field for 9 pass plays, and Bateman was on the field for 20. So I think that's a pretty heavy indicator of run pass for the Ravens probably, and that makes sense. Duvernay laid a nice little crackback block, seal block inside to spring a run, and I think that was maybe on J.K. Dobbins' touchdown, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. Maybe it was a Justice Hill touchdown, I think, actually. So Duvernay's going to come block, and Harbaugh's going to make sure guys who play their ass off in the run game and on special teams do get the snaps to reward them ultimately. And even Tylan Wallace, Tylan Wallace is chomping at the bit to get a couple snaps. So it's a tough room right now, and hopefully it stays that way. Hopefully that's a way better problem to have than what the Ravens had last year.
Feels weird. The street. Absolutely. And so this one, this is Yuri's question. So key to running in this game at 12 personnel, or is 12 personnel ? I'm going to kind of twist this question a little bit because I'm curious of your thoughts. Going into this game, when we kind of learned that we probably won't see Mark Andrews, a lot of people are like, it's all good. We got Isaiah Likely, we got Charlie Kolar, we can survive. It's the Texans. So don't necessarily disagree about, being a lesser opponent, should be able to win that game. But I was personally a little surprised that folks weren't very concerned about not having Mark Andrews. And that's not really a disrespect to Likely or Kolar. I'm high on both. I think both have potential, but they're not Mark Andrews. And so what did you see from them in game 1 in terms of their level of play? What did you kind of think trying to backfill that role that Mark Andrews plays? I
thought that they both looked terrible in line. I think they were a severe weak spot. And hey, I'm not expecting Charlie Kolar, who's, a baby giraffe in his what is that, his 3rd NFL game, maybe his 4th NFL regular season or like actual game, to go block Will Anderson and be able to reach him and stuff. But he didn't, and I don't trust him to. Likely, who severely overperformed relative to expectation in those exact same circumstances last year.
Yeah.
Also looked a little bit hesitant. I would say he just wasn't getting up into guys. Like, he was a little little casual. I was looking for the right word. A little casual in his engagement, in shooting hands, and his footwork in terms of just getting quick feet, quick balanced, short steps to move. So I would think that maybe we see a little bit. The two things that come to mind to run the ball are what we saw the Browns do: booting Deshaun Watson, moving the pocket, making the defense respect that. Then that opens up the zone game a little bit. Instead of establish the run to work the play action, I think the play action will work to establish the run. In that,
and that's kind of how they did it in the second half, right? Like they didn't have a run game going, but that deep out to Zay where Ricard hit the cross block was off play action, and it was a good example of you were still freezing those linebackers and getting the corners to kind of think a little bit there, the safeties to think a little bit there, and that's really what. I mean, that was also just a beautiful route by Zay Flowers, but that's a good example, I think, of something they did in the second half where they weren't hammering the ball by any means. You just lost your starting running back, but they were still able to use play action to their advantage.
Definitely. And then I would say to run the ball, I'm going whatever you want to call it. If you want to call it 21, if you want to call it 12, I'm going to say Ricard. And I'm going to say go put combinations of Odell, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar on the football field with Andrews and Ricard, and then spread the box out. Open things up that way a little bit to get the run game going. See if you can get a little creative, push the outside zone, push some of the counter game in the run game out of those more spread looks, and have Ricard in there as that 6th offensive lineman, and make the Bengals defense respect the width of the field. And then maybe you'll start being able to have Gus Edwards and Justice Hill on some simple duo or inside zone stuff out of those same looks, be able to slash right downhill a time or two. The key to running the game is like not letting DJ Reader ruin your day. That's I would say is the overall key. And that's probably not going to happen.
Okay, so we'll end here. So we'll do this one last kind of. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball. So what do you, Spencer Nathaniel Schultz, what is the key to the Ravens offense being successful?
Being able to attack the Bengals safeties downfield, forcing them to not have blown coverage, missed assignments on vertical shot concepts, connecting on one early, I think will make the Bengals, especially those safeties, timid. Dax Hill had a pick last week, came off tip ball that landed in his lap. I was like, oh, well, Dax Hill had a pick. He looked all right. He could be a very nice player. Nick Scott has played with the Rams a bit, is probably a smarter player, but Jesse Bates has put a lid on the Ravens pass game against 100%. The Bengals for a couple years now. He's gone. These young guys are being asked to step up and attack them downfield early. I think if you can do that and, just look like a professional NFL team with the snap count on the road and with penalties, pre-snap penalties, and I would say the final thing is I need to see some urgency out of the Ravens running backs and tight ends. If they're an outlet, if they're a valve, if they're leaking into the flat, get your eyes back to the quarterback before you think as quickly as possible. Lamar Jackson, always a little sped up in some of his quick game stuff. He goes too quick. His eyes move too quickly when it's quick game stuff. He needs to slow his eyes down just a half beat, just a half beat. And those running backs and tight ends need to make themselves ball ready. That whole connection can be the extension of the run game, can help alleviate the pass rush, help your offensive line out that has two kind of backup guys coming in week 2, which is a tough ask against a good front. So urgency in the quick game from whoever is the hot read, the check down, whatever it is, get your eyes up quick. And Lamar Jackson needs to have some anticipation, I think, a little bit. It's like weird. You're like, oh, Lamar Jackson has great anticipation, over the middle of the field where it's really hard to throw the ball. He has terrible anticipation in the easiest, most simple stuff, checking the ball down. So they need to get on the same page. It is something that we've never seen be smooth. It might take a month, and I think that's kind of one of the overarching reasons why Todd Monken was brought in. So let's see if we can help Lamar Jackson out in that little quick check down game, make a guy miss, go get 7 yards after the catch on a 2nd and 8, something like that. Get that going early and have urgency.
Love it. And switching to the defensive side of the ball, same question. What do they need to do on defense to contain the trio of wide receivers: Joe Mixon, Joe Burrow, Irv Smith, who had a really good game, I thought.
I've always liked Irv Smith a lot.
He's just been hurt. So what's kind of the key to, keys to success to stopping the Bengals offense?
Turn the ball over the middle of the field. Go hit guys. They're going to funnel everything to the middle of the field. If you know the ball is getting funneled to the middle of the field, make guys pay the price. Get that ball tipped up in the air. Get a turnover. I mean, you're always going to say get pressure on Joe Burrow, things like that. But it's when the Bengals do start trying to sustain those longer drives. That's what the Ravens have forced them to do. I don't think Zach Taylor has anything up his sleeve to beat them over the top. Maybe you just simply get a one-on-one with Jamar Chase a couple times, twice, 3 times a game, and he burns you for an 80-yard touchdown. It could happen to any team at any given time. But when you know you've got the lid on them, when you know you're in a more conservative coverage, somebody go make them pay the price. Somebody get the ball out, turn the football over. Once they start, trying to 8 yards, 12 yards, throwing those little curl routes, those sit downs in between zones over the middle of the field. That's where the Ravens want to funnel. So when you know you're funneling them there, make them pay the price, take the ball away, punch the ball out, make them a little hesitant. And I think you'll have a strong day. I think my key to this game on that side, I think the key is on that side of the football. And it's if the Bengals can sustain 2 long touchdown drives, meaning like from their own side of the field, really like before the 40, 35, their own 35, their own 25. I think the Bengals win this game. Maybe they beat you for 1 explosive touchdown, but if it's 1 explosive touchdown and 1 long drive and then a field goal, that's 17 and you can win. Right. So,
which was the playoff game, basically, where they were in a position.
And then there was a 100-yard fumble return for a touchdown. So with that, make them go the long way and make them pay the price for doing so. And I think you can get out of Cincinnati with a win.
Love it. So that's all we have for you guys. Huge thanks to Spen. You can find him at the Exit 52 podcast doing the jumbo set with our boy Jake Luke. Spenny, thank you so much. What are you doing for the game on Sunday?
I'm not sure yet. I'm actually not sure yet. Watching somewhere. A lot of times I like to watch by myself.
I do too. And nobody wants to watch with me anyway, including my family. So, which is probably reasonable. I get angry. So that's
I used to be a little more psychotic, but I've chilled out in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I've noticed. I'm still very emotional, as you well know. So that's all we have for you guys. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. Peace out, everyone.